Welcome to the League of Women Voters Go Vote Omaha. My name is Crystal Fox and I'm the membership director and also a League member. Today we have Senator Justin Wayne and voting director at Civic Nebraska, Christian-Sallis. And we'll be talking about voter disenfranchisement. On the screen now, you'll see a definition of what felon disenfranchisement means. And we'll continue to talk about that with our guests today and really dive in. Is there a camera? So, Senator Wayne has introduced LB83, and I'll have him discuss what that means for our country.
LB83 is a bill that would remove the 2-year felon voting right restriction that currently is in place. So right now, when you complete your sentence, you're off paper. That means whether it's post-supervised release or parole, when you're off paper, you still have to wait an arbitrary 2 years. About 12 to 15 years ago, Nebraska, if you were a felon in Nebraska, you couldn't vote. On the floor, they introduced a bill to allow people to vote right when they got out of prison or off paper, and it was arbitrarily amended on the floor to 2 years. And it was amended because there was an election around the corner, and they were unsure of how it would affect the election. And so my bill is trying to remove that arbitrary 2 years and say, when you've completed your sentence, you've completed your punishment, you've been rehabilitated, it's time to get you back engaged to society, and one way to do that is through voting.
Awesome. And what kind of work have you kind of already done around, like maybe studying this issue, and how many people are affected by voter disenfranchisement?
Well, this actually comes from when we first became a state, back in the 1800s. We were actually vetoed by President Johnson at the time, and we were vetoed twice actually because in our state constitution, African Americans were not allowed to vote. We were always a free state, but they would not allow us to vote. Then when we tried to apply for statehood, Congress, who had just passed 13th, 14th Amendment, said, wait a minute, if we're going to create equality for everybody, we have to make sure states coming into our statehood have that same equality principle. So after the 2 vetoes, we were the only state to come in with a condition that at our next constitutional convention, we have to make sure all people can vote. So when we decided that all people could vote, at the same time, Carter Glass, a U.S. Treasurer at the time, was going around the South coming up with felon disenfranchisement laws. And the reason that is because at the time in the late 1800s, when free slaves got engaged, they were afraid that they could no longer be the majority. And in fact, we had African Americans who were recently elected at 1800s to Congress, and they didn't like that idea. So what we decided as a country during that time was we would create these arbitrary felon laws, and we would make sure that African Americans were punished with felonies so they couldn't vote. And that swept all through the South, and then it happened to sweep up into Nebraska as we were a borderline state. So looking at the historical context, many states have gotten rid of this. In fact, Iowa just passed unanimously in their Senate that they're going to put it on the ballot to get rid of their ban on felon voting. So we looked at that historical context and said it should be removed. Then working with Civic Nebraska, we also went out and did a lot of research. The first year I introduced LB83 in 2017, and what we found through numerous studies, particularly Florida, had a study where felons who recently came out of the prison who, when they were able to vote right away, were less likely to commit crimes. And so it dropped their recidivism rate almost 30% for those people engaged. And if you think about that, when you get out, there's an election always every 2 years. You're re-engaged in your community, you're having a voice in your community, and that vote matters. And so you re-engage that population. So there's been tons of research, and Civic Nebraska was huge in 2017 when we passed it and the governor vetoed it. And now again this year, trying to get it out of committee, they've been a huge asset. And that's what it's about, community organizations and elected officials coming together to put the data behind what we're trying to do. So there has been a lot of research done.
Can you speak on that as well, Brian?
Yeah, I think kind of like you were saying, in that 2-year gap, we have this tool, which is voting, that we're not using. That would be really helpful in helping people be able to be more integrated into their communities. And, you know, we expect everyone to follow the laws, so we want them to have a voice in creating those laws. And it's just it's having this great tool that will engage people and lower that recidivism rate, which, you know, that would be helpful to so many other ways in Nebraska, and we're just not using it. And to me, that's the biggest issue, is it's something that can help, which we just are not taking advantage of.
There are some arguments I've heard that say providing a waiting period allows people to kind of get started off right. How would you react to that? I
would say the sentence that the judge gives you, your punishment for your crime, that's your waiting period. An additional 2 years, like you were saying, it's arbitrary. It came from trying to hit that compromise, and the election being upcoming. There's no like backing, scientific backing that says the additional 2 years would help. And you know, not everyone, even the punishment is the same length. So some people, that 2 years might be on top of 12 years. So there is no need for it.
And the interesting part about the 2 years is you can go out, and I need the voters to understand this, you can go out and commit multiple misdemeanors. You can even commit a new felony as long as you're not convicted. You could be awaiting trial during those 2 years and still be able to vote. So this 2 years is not 2 years on good behavior. It's just a random 2 years. And what we've done in our sentencing guidelines, our sentencing policy, is we've now created this post-supervised release for all major felonies. And what that means is after you do your hard sentence, we're going to monitor you for another 24 months on paper, is what we call it. I'm a criminal defense attorney, so that's what my clients and everybody, we all talk about it on paper. So on paper, you have somebody watching you for another 2 months, or another 2 years. Then after that, you have an arbitrary 2 years. It makes no sense. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing is you're taking people, and the presumption is, and let me back up. The presumption is felons are automatically sentenced to prison, and that's just not the case. We have an entire category called Class 4 felonies, where the presumption is you do not do any jail time. No. You do probation. Mm-hmm. So you have people who are literally doing probation, never walked into a prison, never walked into a jail for 5 years, and then they have an additional 2 years where they can't vote. They've never been sentenced to prison. They've never done anything that you would think of when you say robbery or murder. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about there are many people who have never set foot in prison who are caught up in probation for 5 years, and then we have an arbitrary 2 years after that. So it's the arbitrariness, and there's really no 2 years plus good behavior. It's just 2 years. Mm-hmm. And my belief is when they come out of the system, we need to wrap our arms around them and get them fully engaged into the community so they don't go back to what they got them in trouble in the first place.
So what kind of work can the community do to support this?
So right now the bill is in committee. It's stuck in committee. So the best thing you can do is call those senators on the Government Veteran Affairs Committee and help get that bill out of committee. If it gets out of committee, it won't pass this year, but it'll be what's called the workbook order, which means next year, the first part of January, we could get to it. And we can get to it and we can get it passed, particularly for the November elections if we put an emergency clause on it. So there's things we can do, but it does require this community to get up, get engaged, and it affects everybody. This is not a North and South Omaha issue. The reason we were able to get it moving the first year is because there are also a lot of farmers and people out in western Nebraska who maybe, whether it's insurance issues or something, they got caught up in the system, never did a day in jail. And we were able to pull a lot of rural support to get this bill passed, and then the governor vetoed it. And right now it's kind of stuck in committee, and we need to be able to get it out of committee.
Yeah, and I would say additionally, people who are right now kind of fall in that 2 year waiting period, or people who are serving their sentence right now, especially those who are just on probation, share your stories. Definitely get it out there. Let groups know about it, because sharing those stories helps convince other senators that, you know what, this is something that does need to have movement.
And it kind of like would support your idea, because when I think of felony, I do think of like more serious crimes, and do forget about people who, like you said, have never been to jail but still need our support because the laws have affected their lives. So that's a really good thing for me to think about as well. Let
me give you an example of two felonies that are a little interesting. So cell phones. So Nebraska has one of the least value or the lowest value to commit a felony really in the country.
You mean like how much?
How much something's worth.
Okay.
So ours is roughly $500. Well, that's a cell phone. When this was originally passed in the 70s, they were thinking of people walking into people's homes and stealing the big tube TVs that cost $500, right? They weren't imagining today that it's a cell phone, that it could be a pen. I mean, we have pens that are, and just those kind of computer, a laptop, whereas Michigan and other states have decided, Wisconsin have decided, we're gonna up that value, we're gonna change some things to help deal with this felony issue. Another issue that we're seeing a lot in western Nebraska is possession of residue marijuana or methamphetamine, or now this is non-smokable, non-usable, so you can't do anything with it. It's a pipe that has nothing in it, but one day years ago was smoked. That's a felony. So you have people who are picking up pipes who are looking at things and like, oh, I'm gonna throw this away, and they get popped. And literally, we have case after case where they were just cleaning out stuff, and that's a felony charge. And so we haven't updated our felony system, and now we have a direct result of many people who are being disenfranchised because of that. And that's why you see Alabama, which most consider a very conservative state, Iowa, Texas. Texas repealed their 2 years. Like, people are saying felons should be able to vote. All of us believe when you do your time, you come out, you're back in good standing, that you're able to work, you're able to be engaged, you're able to pay taxes, you should be able to vote.
Yeah, along with that, like Nebraska, we are in the 5 most restrictive states for voting rights. So I think that's a big thing that, a lot of states that were with us, even in 2005 when the original 2 years passed, other states, they've moved in the right direction. We've kind of been stuck in a holding pattern. So I think that's a big thing, is that other states that were at the same place we were have moved forward, and we haven't.
What other arguments do you hear that counter your positions?
I'll let you go first. I mean, go ahead. You can.
The one I probably hear the most is, the fact that, they committed a crime, why should they be able to vote? And I always just think that it really goes down to these people are found competent to stand trial. If they're able to stand trial, they should be able to vote as well. I think that's a huge thing. If you find someone competent, then they're competent. So saying that they're competent to stand trial is, to me, the same as saying they're competent to vote.
The biggest issue we always hear is felons. I mean, the issue around felony and what a felon means, and the misconception that people don't know. We have a lot of class 4 felonies, and even class 3s, you can get probation. It's up to 20 years for the people who get probation, and people who get 0 time, and just a fine. And so there's a misconception of what felony really means. But more importantly, it's really about they're a felon, and they shouldn't have the same. But at the end of the day, this is what I tell people: 95% of the people who are in prison are one day going to be walking around next to us. We're not going to lock them up. We can't lock them up forever. 95% of the people will get out. And when they get out, do we want them to be engaged for their first 2 years? Or do we want the first 2 years, which everybody says, study after study, is the most critical of whether they're going to reoffend or not? Do we want to not engage them? It's either engage or don't engage. And we know study after study says that those 95% of people who come out and engage in their community, their recidivism rate drops. So to me, when I look at the prison population crisis we have, where we're at 163% capacity, this is one more tool to help when people come out. We release about 2,200 prisoners a year from the state of Nebraska. This is a tool to get them re-engaged back in their society. Hey, register to vote, upcoming election in 2 years, let's get you engaged on politics, let's get you engaged on how things happen in the local community. This is a prime way to do that.
Awesome. And you guys kind of touched on it, on how we compare to other states. What were the other 4 states that are super restrictive?
Ooh, off the top of my head, Iowa, but they just recently passed that, so hopefully that will go all the way through. Kentucky is one of them.
Alabama was, but they got rid of theirs.
They were
Florida was, and they moved.
Interesting.
So to his point, though, that's what I'm saying. People are recognizing that at the end of the day, if we want people to turn out to vote, we want to keep our communities engaged, voting's a critical tool. And particularly for African Americans. African Americans, people have died for their right to vote. And we have to make sure that sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed, right? So we have to make sure that when we look at particularly Nebraska, where there's 2 times or 3 times the rate of prison population of African Americans in our current population, that there's an issue, but we can't allow that disenfranchisement to exacerbate, to keep growing even more. And so this is one way to get people engaged, and there's so much confusion. There's confusion around whether I can vote at all if I'm a felon. And the easiest way is to educate people and just say, when you get out, you can vote.
You're able to vote.
And that's one of the things we see all the time is that people don't know. We'll get calls because someone saw something we posted on social media, not realizing after the 2 years they could actually vote again. And it's that experience of hearing somebody on the phone, like what goes through their head and their realization that they're able to vote because they thought they were banned for life, and now it's, 10 years down the road and they realize they can vote. It's a really cool experience, and that's one of the things we need to do more of when people are leaving. We're not giving out things that say, after 2 years you can vote again. That's not happening, so we need to look into things like that.
So even with the system we have, trying to make sure it's working as well.
Actually, we had an individual last election who was over the 2 years, but the state system and the county system weren't linking up, and so it was a big ordeal. We had to go back and figure out where his 2 years calculated. So that's part of the problem is when you get out, you're not out.
Right.
You got post-supervised release. And so making sure all that data points line up to the local level is sometimes difficult because you could be out and on post-supervised release, you could be convicted of a felony and never do jail time. And so there are people who are falling through the cracks because it's not cut and dry.
And especially along those lines, looking at with the 2-year waiting period was created, one of the concerns and reasons why they were saying it was brought to try and get rid of it was that Nebraskans who had felony convictions weren't being able to vote, but felons from other states were. Because there wasn't and isn't really a good system for tracking people who are coming into our state. So we're really only stopping Nebraskans with felony convictions from voting.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting thought. I wouldn't have.
It's just part of the system. I mean, unless you do a background check on somebody, which obviously you have to consent to, you don't get anything else but the Nebraska system.
Okay, that's an interesting thought to think about. Do you guys have any closing statements on what you think? You kind of touched on a lot of things where we talk about the benefits to those who are able to vote, but also our community. And what, if I, as a person who's never committed a felony, why do I care about this?
You want to go first? Or
sure. I would say the reason to care is because voting is a civil right. People have fought for that civil right, but no one should have to fight for their civil right. So with a key civil right like voting, when we have the opportunity to expand that right, which is every American's right anyway, we should be doing all we can to do that.
For me, there's 2 reasons, and I kind of talked on both of them a little bit before, but I think it's important to emphasize. One, 95%, 96% will be released. I mean, that's just the fact. They don't have life sentences and they're not sentenced to death. So the people who are in those 2 categories are 2 or 3% of the population, of prison population. So everybody else will be released. And study after study continues to show that when they're released and they're engaged, recidivism goes down. And the reason that's important is because from a prison population standpoint, we are overcrowded and we have serious problems which are going to cause the state, and it's very dangerous to staff, and we have more staff being assaulted. So anything that can reduce people going in, we have to spend a real amount of time having conversation about how do we implement, how do we make it better. This one's a simple one.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about prison reform, we're not talking, but study after study shows that it works. So why not do it? It just baffles my mind sometimes. The second thing is to the point of the historical context. We were denied statehood over this issue. And just because there was a workaround to not allow African Americans to vote, and here's why I say that. To steal a horse in 1900s was a misdemeanor. But if you were to steal a pig from a pen that's ready to be slaughtered, it was a felony. Now, why is that important? Well, the horse is in western Nebraska, but the pens were all here in the stockyards. And where were the minorities located at? So those were intentional things to create felonies and to change things and treat people differently. So when you look at that historical context, for no reason alone, we have to erase that discriminatory past to say, look, we're not doing this. This is not okay anymore.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, voting is not, it's our civic duty. And I think when I knock on doors and find people who want to vote, but they feel they can't because they're a felon, we sit there and fill it out online, and these people are in tears because they get to cast their first vote, and they never thought they could. People want to do this, people want to be engaged, and that's why it's important that we allow them to be engaged.
Awesome. You guys have any closing statements you want to make about voter disenfranchisement and how we can make changes to our system?
The biggest thing is be active. We have to vote, we have to get out to vote, and we have to continue to push our elected officials to do better. So I'm looking dead in the camera. I think this is the camera that you have to hold me accountable to pushing this issue. The more people who can get out to vote, the better our society is. And the more people who run for office, the better our society is. Because we have to bring ideas together, and we got to sell those ideas to what's best for our community. And if I'm not selling the best idea and the next person is, then that's who you should vote for. Because we got to start building trust and hope and a relationship with our elected officials, but that all comes from a vote. The vote is the critical thing. When we're down talking about how to make changes and how to do things, people go back and look at who turns out to vote and why it matters. And if my district, District 13, the second place finisher in the primary, has more votes than the total District 11, which is North Omaha, right in the heart of North, that's a problem. We got to re-engage them. And we got to make sure that we as a community and all these organizations re-engage people to get them to vote and to get them to turn out, because that's ultimately how we're going to change. We have a huge battle going on in the legislature right now about property taxes and raising taxes. And some people want to tax food and tax other things that would ultimately hurt low income. We got to turn out to vote to make sure we have people in office that can stand up against that, because it directly impacts everything that we do. So get out to vote, be engaged, and call your senator. Well, call the senator. I'm already, if I'm your senator, you don't have to call me, but you can. But call the people on the committee and get this bill out. LB83, get it out of the committee, and we can have a debate on the floor.
Yeah, I would just say, and finish up with, that voter suppression won't always look like dogs and fire hoses. So people need to be aware that these are the modern forms of voter suppression, and they need to fight them with just as much vigor as they fought dogs and fire hoses. So yeah, reach out to your senators, help get this bill out of committee. This bill will make a huge difference in a lot of people's lives. Right now there's about 7,000 Nebraskans in that 2-year waiting period, and they all deserve the right to vote.
Awesome. That is really very good information, I think, and helps us understand like a very broad topic. And I've learned a lot of things as well. And I think it's important that we, League of Women Voters, uses their influence to really help people understand these bigger issues. And so I'm glad you guys are here today. I think if you guys want to make any pitches, like how do people find out more about Civic Omaha? And
to find out more about Civic Nebraska, just go to www.civicnebraska.org. We have a lot of great information on there and different policy papers where you can read up on different voting rights initiatives in the legislature and on the county levels as well. And feel free, my information is on there, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you take action.
And the reason I think it's important is to reach out to Civic Nebraska is because it isn't just the felon disenfranchisement. There's voter ID. There's numerous things that closing polling locations. There's numerous things that we need community engagement on, and there are a wealth of resources as far as a wealth of knowledge of resources and resources that we all could use. And for me, you can call my office anytime. You can Google it, but my number is 402-471-2727. Just stay engaged. That's the key. Just stay engaged.
You also answer email.
I do answer email. I answer all my email personally, so it may take me a couple of days to get back to you, but I try to personally answer so I can stay in contact with people who actually reach out to me via email.
Perfect. The League of Women Voters is also a resource. We provide shows like this to kind of help encourage and educate our community. So I think with that we will end. Thank you so much for joining us here at the League of Women Voters. Go Vote Omaha. Again, my name is Crystal Fox, and I'm the membership director as well as a league member, and we're always excited to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Don't
you.
get up.